Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Canada's boxing channel. I say good morning, it's still morning here, although quite late in the morning. I meant to get this out earlier, but unfortunately I had to go for various medical tests today. As we age, we'll find that medical appointments take up far more of your calendar than they ever used to. So getting old sucks, but of course the alternative sucks much more. Anyways, enough of that. Let's get on to the subject of this video. I want to say that this video is designed not to make an allegation against any person or to be sort of, really disruptive, but rather so that we can collectively turn our minds to things and start thinking. So, without further ado, I may as well just get on with the piece, I suppose. Many of us, looking at the demographics on YouTube, grew up at a time when, if you heard it on the BBC, or in my case in Canada, the CBC or NBC in the States, you had a degree of comfort. If you listen to, in the UK, Richard Baker or Reginald Bosanquet, or in the US, Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, you sat and you listened, and whether it was true or not, you had a degree of confidence. Likewise with sports writers. If Jim McKay or Liebling, before my time, Red Smith, Nat Fleischer, Larry Merchant, Howard Cosell, Barney Nagler, of course, who wrote a very famous book about boxing corruption. When those fellows put together a piece, you knew that it had been well researched and that they'd conducted some degree of real investigative journalism, that they had gone out of their way to ask awkward, annoying, and sometimes plain rude questions. Famously, Howard Cosell would put a disguise on to get into places where he would be, asking questions of people. And I'm a little concerned now that we don't have that kind of investigative heft, if you like, with respect to the sport of boxing, and in particular with asking meaningful, serious questions of promoters, trainers, boxers, money men that we used to have. What prompted me to really, spend some time this morning thinking about this is I watched a Seconds Out video with Radio Raheem, who is exceptionally well-spoken, very telegenic, very comfortable behind the camera, it's rather in front of the camera, and a very, very, very articulate, well-spoken fellow, who's very, very successful. I mean, he's one of the sort of the famous names, I suppose, now in the modern version of boxing journalism. Of course, YouTube has become, in many respects, the modern version of what used to be the purview of somebody with a notepad and a pen and then clacking out something on a typewriter and getting a story off to the New York Times or the Daily Telegraph or something like that. Sadly, of course, the Daily Telegraph's boxing promoter is none other than Gareth A. Davis, who, well, I suppose he does very, very well financially. We'll leave it at that. But anyhow, Mr. Raheem was speaking to Seconds Out, and he was quite insistent that he had now gotten to the bottom of the reasoning and the timeline for Daniel Dubois, the World Heavyweight Champion, IBF version, the reason behind Daniel Dubois' withdrawal from his voluntary defense this past weekend against Joe Parker. And of course, I'm interested. Oh, you've cracked the case. You're shedding some light on this somewhat murky kind of story, because of course the story as proffered by Frank Warren has been that, you know, Daniel was sick, that he may have taken some over-the-counter medication, some antihistamines, etc., so forth. It was a little bit vague, and of course, you know, there was no press conference by anybody from Team Dubois. There was no medical people there in white coats saying we've examined the patient and this, that, and the other. So, you know, while we all hope that Daniel has a speedy and full recovery, it still left us as fans curious or skeptical. And for fans of Daniel, of which there are very, very many, no doubt they were worried. You know, you worry about your sporting hero's well-being, right? You know, I can remember very clearly if, you know, when I was much younger, if somebody that I was a big fan of was injured or sick in some way, you know, you would worry like, oh, I hope he's going to get better soon. And how is this going to affect their future performance, etc., so forth, right? Well, as the video was unfolding, Mr. Rahim, it became clear that his primary source of information was none other than Don Charles. Now, Don Charles is a very well-known trainer, a person who I enjoy listening to, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that Don Charles would knowingly purvey a terminological inexactitude. But I was thinking, and possibly this is based upon my former life when I was working, that interviewing somebody who's very well connected to the person who's ill and asking that person for a breakdown of the reasoning why they withdrew has merit, yes, because of course they are in a position to know. But in a way, it's a little bit like asking a suspect's lawyer to give you a version of events, because you will get the version of events from the suspect's perspective. And that's always fraught with difficulty, because there is, even if there is no intention to mislead or obfuscate, you're getting a somewhat shaded opinion. To put it bluntly, it's like asking someone's mum for a character reference. You know, oh yes, little Johnny, he's a lovely boy, he's never been in trouble. When in fact, you know, that's a mum's perspective. Possibly asking the neighbour across the street, you might end up with yeah, he's a nice enough little boy, but he's a right little bastard sometimes. You know what I'm going with this, right? I'm not saying that Don Charles would or is shading anything here. I'm saying that it puts Don Charles, quite frankly, in a difficult spot. Don Charles is employed by Mr. Dubois, works very closely with Mr. Dubois, and may not even necessarily know all the facts. So to tell us as boxing fans who have, you know, paid money to watch a fight, or, you know, maybe have flown out to Riyadh to watch a fight, to tell us that I've solved it, you need to believe what I'm saying because I've spoken to the man's trainer and there's nothing to see here, move along. I think that's stretching things a bit. I would prefer to see a degree of objectivity. I would prefer to see a bit more digging being done, especially as, you know, the news tends to be less reliable than perhaps it once was. So this is all I'm saying, is that, you know, if we are to watch that seconds out video and take it all as gospel, that what we are being told is true, and that any and all skepticism or questions are nothing but some sort of right-wing conspiracy theory, Well, that doesn't really sit well, does it? I mean, we don't have to go back overly long in history to listen to the White House press secretary tell the world that Joe Biden was as sharp as a tack, shortly before we all saw his brain fall out on national television. Or if we go back further, Colin Powell, a man of unimpeachable integrity, told the United Nations that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Something that was subsequently found out to be not accurate. So all I'm saying is that we as fans ought to have a healthy degree of skepticism about what we're told, and surely we should now be holding the modern day sports journalists, who happen to be YouTubers, big, successful and very financially secure, no doubt, YouTube folks, we need to hold those folks to a standard rather than just, doling out, repeating a story that a promoter or a trainer or a manager would like us as fans to accept at face value. Does this sound reasonable? Do you think that we should be asking for more questions being asked? Like, I can imagine, without overly sort of taxing my brain, that if a journalist had stood up in front of Frank Warren and said, are you now or have you ever been aware of Mr. Dubois either refusing a test, having failed a test, or having an adverse reaction to a test? Well, two things would have happened probably. Frank Warren would have exploded, the journalist would have been asked to leave, and the journalist would have been denied access for having the temerity to ask a question. I mean, the question doesn't sound very polite. I get that. But the question ought to be asked. We're not talking about, the motor mechanic or the public servant or the postman who's phoned in sick. We don't expect those people to be cross-examined. But I think we have a reasonable expectation for a elite, world-class athlete to be held to account, either directly or through team members or through objective third parties. That's my view. I suspect that Daniel Dubois fans will object to this video and be, strongly disagreeing with me, and that's fine, so long as you're polite. I mean, I'll respect everyone's perspective, because I'm not making an accusation here. I'm not accusing anybody of any wrongdoing, nor am I suggesting anybody has lied, either unintentionally or intentionally. I'm saying that exposing a story to the harsh light of proper investigative journalism will benefit everybody. That's my take. Please let me know what you think in the comments section below. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and most importantly, have a fabulous day. Cheers. See you next time. Bye-bye.